26% of autistic adults in the UK are diagnosed with clinical depression. That is scary.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, your pocket-sized career mentor on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders. For our final episode in our specialist advice feature series, we're joined by Onyinye Udokporo, one of the UK's youngest education experts, an entrepreneur, a dyslexic author, a neurodiversity consultant, and a content creator. Onyinye's entrepreneurial journey started when she was just 12 years old, where she began tutoring young people from her local community in her parents' living room. Following her diagnosis with dyslexia, she has gone on to become an author of a book, Dyslexia and Me, How to Survive and Thrive If You're Neurodivergent, and also started her own Neurodiversity Consulting firm in 2022, where she delivers training and workshops as well as consulting services to businesses including Google and the BBC. This episode is an extra special one, not only because of Onyinye's incredible career so far, but also because she is a fellow alumni of my old school, Christ Hospital. So, a huge welcome, Onyinye. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Super excited to be on this podcast because I am an avid listener and a fan. So thank you for having me.
Oh, that's so kind. And I'm thrilled that you're a fan and listen to the podcast. And I can't wait to share your story with our listeners. So, as you'll know, we like to warm you up with some kickoff questions. And we've got 3 for you today. So, please finish the following sentences after me. Number 1, I feel most energized when...
I wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym.
Is that a common occurrence? I mean, I love the idea of that, but that is just brutal if you do it all the time.
The endorphins afterwards make it so worth it. And the truth is, as soon as the alarm goes off, you just have to jump straight out of bed. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, so true. So true. Oh, I love that. Great answer. My biggest failure to date is...
The first time I opened the Enrich Learning Tuition Centre in Winchmore Hill, North London, only one student came. And I had spent all this money on marketing and advertising, and I had this big intro about it on social media, and genuinely one student came, and that student saw me break down in tears. It's fine. I've got amazing news. We're now working across different youth hubs in London in partnership with Haringey Council. So there is success at the end, but there were so many learnings.
Oh, it's amazing to hear sort of the evolution from that really disappointing first day. But thank you for sharing. I think it's important because there are a lot of bumps along the road of entrepreneurship, aren't they? And it shouldn't put you off. Final question. Good mentorship means to me...
compassionate accountability. I do think that a mentor should be able to hold you to a standard and help you elevate your practice or elevate the way you're doing business, but they should do so compassionately. So it shouldn't have a hierarchical feel in the relationship. It should feel not necessarily equal because you're aspiring to follow in the footsteps and hopefully do even better than your mentors. You aspire to learn from them. But I do think it's important for them to be able to pull you up and call you out. My mentors have certainly done so, but they've done so with compassion, and that's what's helped me get to where I am today.
I love that answer. I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it, and I can really resonate with my own experience with my mentors. They've definitely done that for me. Wow, Onyinye, we've warmed you up, and now we're going to dive straight into learning all about your career. But before we get onto the work stuff, I'd love to hear a bit more about your upbringing and really understand how that has shaped the person you are today, and also the career you have today.
Yeah, so I've had a very interesting upbringing. I have 2 amazing immigrant parents. They immigrated from Nigeria, and I have 3 younger brothers. I am the eldest and the only female child, therefore the matriarch of the household. But in all seriousness, I come from a tight family unit. We're very close, and we're all very close in age. My parents had 4 of us in 5 years. I don't know if that was an accident or on purpose, because it must have been chaotic having 4 under 5s at one time. And 4 under 5s at one time, life began in a 1-bedroom flat in North London.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Everyone's eyes always, or the eyebrows always go up like, wow, really. But my parents are super hard workers and worked their way into a lovely home. By the time I was 5, going on 6 years old, we moved into a home with 2 gardens. I had my own bedroom. It was a big change, but I saw the work and the sacrifice and the entrepreneurship that, in particular, my mother displayed to get us to that point. So, a really fruitful and happy childhood despite not having a lot. Education was a big focus, a really, really big focus. My parents believed that if they sacrificed everything but gave all their kids the very best education, that would enable us to reach the highest heights. And it is true, all 4 of us have gone to university, with the youngest currently at a Russell Group University studying mechanical engineering. So they've not done too badly considering where we started, but a very happy home.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure they're incredibly proud. It's a really inspiring story. We've said it before on this podcast, but there's something really special, I think, about immigrant parents that come to this country often with not a lot, and they work tirelessly to provide for the next generation. I think that just says a lot about them. And often, I think it's the reason why we've been able to share so many incredible stories, because we have children of those immigrants that have, just created an incredible life for them to go on and fulfill their dreams. I'd love to hear about your career. It's been a really interesting, I mean, you've achieved a lot in a relatively short amount of time, and you've only really just got started. But do you mind telling our audience, if they don't know about your background, a bit about the kind of career story to date? Would love to hear that.
Yeah. So I started in the world of work at the age of 12. I've just shared a little bit about my background. So I don't come from a lot of money. And yes, I went to Christ Hospital and had the most amazing 7 years there. But although I was there with a scholarship and a bursary, I was supported by a livery company, the tilers and bricklayers. My parents were still paying a considerable amount of fees, school fees. So I felt really uncomfortable asking them for any pocket money. And as you know, independent school, private school summer holidays are extortionately long and boring if you have nothing to do. Because when you come from a family that doesn't have lots of money, you're not going to be going on these great big adventure holidays. I was coming back to Edmonton and I was staying in Edmonton for 8, 9, 10 weeks. So I asked my mum if I could help people with their homework and if I could charge them, because I was not going to work for free. And it took off from there. I started helping this young girl with her homework and this young boy. And the parents said, "Oh, you did the 11 plus, you're really good at it. Would you mind tutoring?" I said to my mum, "Look, if I'm going to start tutoring 11 plus, the price has to go up." I remember starting at about £7 for an hour and a half. I thought I was loaded because, by the end of the week, if they'd come a couple of times, I'd have 40 quid. I could go to the cinema. That was always what I wanted to do. I could go to Primark. This is terrible. I'm not a fan of fast fashion anymore. But at the time, I didn't know much about sustainability and sustainable shopping. But I would go to Primark and buy all these things I didn't need just because I liked the feeling of having the multiple shopping bags. So I kept myself busy, and I tutored throughout my time at CH secretly. So the teachers didn't know. Throughout university, I thought I would give it up at university. I went to King's College London. 1 week going to university in central London and living in southeast London quickly showed me that I needed a job very, very, very fast. So I came back to tutoring, grew that business, but also got very stuck into policy. I was one of the assistant heads of communication for the King's think tank, which was the largest student led think tank in Europe, which felt like a full time job. And that does link into why I ended up doing a postgrad in policy. And the work I do now as a consultant is very policy focused. So I always had an ambition there. Originally, my career was supposed to be like every other high achieving Russell Group attending graduate, which is I was meant to go and work for a big four professional services firm. I had signed the contracts, I had the date in place. Like I was really supposed to go, and then I quit on the day I was meant to start. You can imagine how a Nigerian dad felt about that. My mum, she's a little rebel. She was supported me from behind, but she never tells my dad this. She makes it seem like I came up with this idea myself, but she would whisper in my ear, "You don't really want to do that. You don't really want to do a 9 to 5. Out of all my kids, you're the entrepreneur. Just focus on your business." Meanwhile, dad is telling all his friends when they come round, yes, my daughter, she's going to work for a big four professional services firm. So when I quit on the day I was meant to start, I think it was uncomfortable. I also had a personal reason why I quit, which is that my uncle, who was, everyone knows, because I was very public about the grief journey that I went on, he sadly passed away at 9 a.m. on the day I was meant to start after a really long, horrific battle with COVID. It was 6 months of being told he's going to die, then he survived. And eventually, I think the best decision was for him to pass on because it was just so horrible. But I do think that solidified my decision. I feel like that was the final blessing he gave me, which was to go forth and be an entrepreneur, but also build what I like to call a portfolio career. So I'm an entrepreneur. I started creating content on the internet, predominantly LinkedIn, when I was at university. And that led to me being one of the first members of the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program. It led to me becoming one of their creators. I've done 2 big campaigns for LinkedIn now, and I've been spotted by other organizations to create content for them, either through brand partnerships or through learning and development content. I got spotted on social media. I made a couple of YouTube videos whilst I was at university. I really tried my hand at everything. One of my videos got spotted, my blog got spotted, and I signed a book deal just before I finished my postgraduate degree. So I'm one of those people who definitely feels that the world of work is changing. You do not have to do one thing. Starting a business age 12, becoming a published author by the age of 23, content creation like properly from the age of 18. Like you can have your fingers in many pies and do well at all of those things.
It's just so inspiring. And I think such a great story for people to hear, because work is changing. There are so many opportunities out there. And you sometimes you just got to grab the ball by the horns and just go for it and try different things and see what works. So it's brilliant to hear. I'm really glad you turned down that big four role, because you've gone on to achieve so much. I know we'll tell our audience a bit more about some of the very exciting things you have in the pipeline in a bit. But I guess your tutoring business, Enriched Learning, it's come a long way since your parents' living room where you're charging a £7.50 or whatever it was an hour. So tell us a bit more about like the evolution of the business, and particularly, you know, as somebody that's doing this for the first time at a very young age to begin with, but still at a young age in the grand scheme of things, what have been your biggest learnings from that journey thus far?
So the business, like I said, started at that very young age, but really took off online after I won 2 scholarships to study at Tsinghua University. So if anyone is listening and is a student or is just taking a career break, what I would say is and travel with a purpose. So I went out to China and I studied online education. I got one of the top marks in the class, and that was an intentional course decision. I remember my lecturers being like, this is totally unrelated to what you're doing. My first degree is in religion, politics, and society. But they didn't know I had a vision and a mission. I spotted a gap in the market, which was that online tutoring at the time, this is pre-COVID, was reserved for those who had lots of money, and it was predominantly international students. So I was a student at King's tutoring ultra high net worth individuals' children in Australia, in America, in parts of Asia. And I realized that, first of all, this is something that we need in the UK. It cuts travel time. It also stops me from running around London like a headless chicken. So Enriched Learning really took off when I got back from China and learning and understanding how online education works, how they are able to scale. Because in China, they have up to 1,000 students in an online classroom at one time. Yeah, they're called MOOCs, multiple occupancy classrooms. And I don't think in the UK we'd be able to have 1,000 kids in an online class and everyone behave well. There's definitely a different culture around education there, but that inspired me to come back to the UK and do the same thing. I'm quite good with tech, so I made all the Enriched Learning websites and stuff myself in the early days. I literally just didn't sleep for 4 days. I literally did not close my eyes. It was serious hyper focus to get it done. I began with my tutors using Skype. Then we moved on to using another platform called Click Meeting before I went into a software distributor partnership with the company that I use now called Fusion. And one of the things I just want to drop in about tech oriented businesses, people always say, oh my gosh, he's an ed tech entrepreneur. And I say, yes, but I don't believe in building the tech myself. I believe in using the tech that's already out there in a really smart way. So I'm a big fan of APIs. I'm a big fan of integrations. And this is because the industry that I'm in, which is education, needs results fast because of the crisis that we're having. And I simply can't afford to spend time raising millions to build tech that I'm not sure is going to work. So my take is to use the tech that currently works and to integrate it in a really smart way and to make it more accessible. So where are we now? We now have our own bespoke online classrooms through this platform that we use called Fusion. We can have endless number of kids in the class. We teach children across the country, in some instances across the world. They join our online classes. The pricing hasn't changed that much because the whole point of going online was to make pricing more accessible. So it still sits at £7.50 an hour for one of our package classes, which is the most affordable rates in the UK for the quality that the kids are getting. We've just had our SATs results. Every single child online got above national expectations for their SATs results. I've never had such a successful cohort of kids actually. And then in terms of face to face, I had to bring that back. Post COVID, parents don't just come to us because of the teaching, but it's because of the social aspect. In our tuition centers, the kids are fed. At the moment, I'm doing a new fruit of the week, exposing children from backgrounds. Some kids have never had an apricot before. Like they've never had an like and this, which sounds crazy, but don't forget, because of our price point, a considerable number of our children are from underserved backgrounds. When you have to worry about buying eggs, milk, and bread, are you going to start buying very expensive exotic fruits? Probably not.
That's very true.
Yeah, it's something that people don't think about. And I guess the most exciting thing is our new partnership with Haringey Council. We've got the Get Your Grades Up program, which sees us offering free tutoring. So the students and the parents will not be paying for GCSE English and Maths tutoring at two youth hubs, one in Wood Green and one in Bruce Grove. So very, very exciting times ahead for enriched learning. And in terms of the tuition centre, the goal is definitely to continue to scale with partnerships with local authority. So yeah, I'm excited for what the future has.
Oh, congrats on everything you've achieved and the impact you're having in those local communities and those, those underserved communities, I think will be profound. And it's already clearly having the results are speaking for themselves, which is awesome to see. And I love the additional education around fruit and things like that. These are things that it's all part of educating kids and giving them, greater exposure. And I think they'll be so much better off for it. So that's very cool to hear. You are probably the youngest entrepreneur we've had on the podcast, which is really cool. And I think it's great because we really want to be showing some of the most inspiring younger entrepreneurs in our ecosystem. Where does your entrepreneurial spirit come from? And has there been one particular big inspiration that's been that sort of driving force throughout your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Yeah, I speak about this quite a lot in my TEDx talk that I did last year. And the entrepreneurial spirit, inspiration comes from my mother and my grandmother. So I come from a generation of incredible business women. My grandmother, she still currently lives in northern Nigeria. She still lives in Jos. She ran shops. She's a seamstress, so she had a boutique, but she was big. And even though she's in her 70s, and we keep telling her to slow down, I recently was told that she is still trading. So she buys produce on wholesale, I mean truckloads, and then those who are selling on the ground buy from her. But she's very smart with the pricing. She takes that pricing and she's able to reinvest that into other things. She runs her own mini poultry farm, which, her pet chickens, they mean a lot to her. And even though I've said, Grandma, maybe retire, she's like, if I retire, I must have my little poultry farm. So very, very industrious. My mother also picked that up. And everyone says, wow, you started your business at 12. My mum started at 8. So I was late as far as she was concerned. Very similar mindset, which is that my grandmother, she was a wholesaler. So she would wholesale very popular hot drink called Milo and Ovaltine, and Bonvita. And my mother realized that most people cannot afford to buy these big containers because they're quite expensive for their children. So she set up shop outside her mother's shop. So first of all, she became her mother's direct competitor. She wasn't paying for any of the produce to begin with because she would just steal the wholesale containers and distribute them into little bags. But they were bags that people could buy on the way to school. So she would sell milk, hot water, and these little bags of powdered hot chocolate that people would buy, and you had to walk past that shop to get to all the schools. And when she got profit, she reinvested in machinery. When she got profit again, she opened a bakery. And then when she got profit again, she delved into this huge wholesaling of rice and onions and tomatoes. And these are big staples in Nigeria that they carry a currency of its own. The way we eat jollof rice, you definitely need to have rice, onions, and tomatoes in your house at all times. So, yeah, it's one of those things. That's where the inspiration came from. So I'm not surprised that I've kind of taken this path in life.
What a cool story. Thank you for sharing it. I guess I wanted to sort of shift track a little bit to talk about neurodiversity and the sort of, I guess, the convergence of that with your entrepreneurial career. You had your dyslexia diagnosis when you were 11 years old, which has then obviously had a big influence on the career path you've chosen. And you've been doing some amazing work in and around the neurodiversity space. So, do you mind sharing a bit more about sort of what it meant to you to have that diagnosis when you did, and the impact it had on your education and life in those kind of earlier years?
Initially, the diagnosis was a disaster. I am from an ethnic minority background where being neurodivergent is 100% a taboo. It's not something that's spoken about. And whilst my parents knew that I had a problem, that's what my dyslexia was referred to. My mother is also dyslexic, so she would always comfort me by saying, don't worry, we have this shared problem. You definitely didn't want to put a label on it. So when I was diagnosed, it was actually at school. I was told this was before we were allowed smartphones in school. So despite me being young, it's to show you how young smartphones really are. I used to go to a phone box, like a phone box to ring my mum. And I called her and I said, Mum, you're going to get a call from the teacher and they're going to tell you that I'm dyslexic. And she said, no, you don't have an illness. Don't let any teacher tell you that you have whatever that is. I'm going to pray. Like you do not have this problem. Don't worry, I'm going to speak to the teacher. Have parents' evening. And my mum sits them down and she goes, why are you telling my child she's sick? She's not sick. Like, what is dyslexia? And they had to break it down for her. They had quite a few phone calls and meetings to make her understand that this is not an illness or a disease. It's not contagious. This is a learning difference. I mean, at the time they called it learning difficulty, but I'm really big on the language that we use. There's nothing difficult about being dyslexic. You have challenges, but you're not a difficult individual. So it's a learning difference that I have with spelling, reading, writing, but also other things, time management, working memory, processing. I've got directional dyslexia, couldn't tell you my left from my right, can't read a map, organizational skills. And these things then intersect with mental health. So I had really crippling anxiety as a teen. CH really did help me a lot. I mean, I was bullied predominantly because of the dyslexia. This was, gosh, 10, 15 years ago now. So teachers still then and still now weren't that educated about dyslexia. So, I'd come into the class and they'd roll their eyes and say, oh, I can't use the green whiteboard pen because Onyinye's in the room. Everyone would start laughing. Or if they had photocopied worksheets, yeah, I read on yellow paper, they'd go, oh, Onyinye is such a princess. We're going to have to go back and photocopy again her work on a yellow sheet because she's so special. So they really made me feel othered unintentionally. They still did all the things they needed to do to support me, but I felt othered in the classroom, and that led to discomfort outside of the classroom. And you know what it's like with boarding, you're not going home for a considerable amount of time. So you kind of have to learn to just cope. But I had amazing, really close friends, a really good relationship with the girls in my boarding house, particularly my seniors.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. But I'm sorry that you went through that. I think it's amazing, and we'll come on to talk a bit about this. But I think things have moved forward a lot, but there's still a lot of work to do on this topic. And there's a lot of kids that go through the system being failed. Again, not always intentionally, but because there is still a lack of education. And you are a shining example of what you can achieve when you're aware of this and you're aware of the superpowers that it brings, but also some of the things that you will struggle with. And I guess it's about just channeling that in the right way and then making others aware of it. And I think there's so much more we can do. So I'm really happy we're talking about this today. I guess for anyone listening to this that might have recently been diagnosed with dyslexia or who has kids that have you got any advice that you'd like to pass on to them?
Yes, I do, which is when you get diagnosed formally, you're often given a ridiculously long report with lots of lingo that you don't understand. And if you're dyslexic, you're not likely to read. In my case, with the diagnosis, you get diagnosed as a child. They then make you do the assessment again at 16. I think they think that maybe you grow out of it. You don't. And then they make you do it again at 18. And 11 and 16, I was well supported. I had good teachers and practitioners at school who went through my report with me and made me understand how my condition shows up and what I need to do and what they can also do to support me, my reasonable adjustments and accommodations, just really made me have a good understanding of my condition. Turned 18, had a horrific experience during my assessment. I actually cried. It was really bad. And then I didn't actually read the report again until I was 23. And I found out that I'm also mildly dyspraxic. So 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 5 years without knowing that. My advice to anyone who's just received a diagnosis, please sit down with a professional in the space, call your assessor again if you have to go through the findings of that report, how your condition shows up, and what reasonable adjustments you need to feel empowered to ask for. It's not just about having the label. In fact, the label to a certain degree is totally irrelevant. It's about what makes you different and what can the world do to support and accommodate for your difference so you can thrive.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much, Onyinye. You're an expert now in diversity, and I guess that answer it really shines a light on that. And you do tons of consulting work with businesses of all different sizes. So, can you share a bit more about the work you do, how you work with businesses, and I guess particularly for fellow neurodivergent founders or entrepreneurs, a little bit more about the advice you'd give them and the work you do with them to help them in their day to day?
The first thing is that I was supposed to go into the big four to be a consultant, although in risk advisory. And I actually don't know why I chose that service line now. I was so confused as a young well, not that young, but heading into my 20s. I just kind of picked any service line. But I realized that I had a really good skill of being able to take lots and lots of information about an organization, review that information with a fine tooth comb, pull out what changes need to be made, and support the organization in implementing those changes. So, how do I work with organizations now? I help organizations become more neuro inclusive in their practice and in their design. That stems from like quite literally office design. What are you doing for your neurodivergent individuals? For example, those with autism may prefer to have a fixed desk as opposed to the nonsense of hot desking. Everyone knows I just think hot desking is a hot mess, but businesses have got to do what they've got to do to save money. So, working with organizations to work through that, make them understand that this person is not being difficult. It is a simple, reasonable adjustment that you can do that will make them actually come into the office at least twice a week, for example. I also work with organizations, in particular with their people manager training. So I'm very interested in helping those that look after others in organizations understand how best to serve the needs of their neurodivergent colleagues and how to integrate them better into teams and make the most out of their excellence. Because as we've said quite a few times, there are some gifts, there are some superpowers. I mean, I always stress that there are loads of challenges, but there are some gifts that neurodivergent people bring to the workplace that no one else can bring. So it's one of those things. I work with organizations to understand that. I do a lot of awareness raising with these organizations. And then with my love of being behind the microphone, in front of the camera, I do lots of content creation for organizations. So one of my coolest projects to date was producing Google's very first mental health and neurodiversity awareness training videos, which was Google put a lot of money behind this project. So it was produced like on a television set, like lots and lots of time, energy. I mean, it's months in the making for this kind of content. And now Googlers all over the world can log into their L&D platform and hopefully enjoy watching and listening to me teach them about mental health and neurodiversity. So that's the work that I do, which is cool. You asked the second question, which is about how my advice to neurodivergent founders. I have three bits of advice, and I really thought about this before coming on today's show. My first bit of advice is get help with your admin tasks as soon as possible. I think I would have gone much faster in business if I leaned into my strengths. And my strengths are not emails. My strengths are not keeping my files organized. These are not my strengths. There are affordable, smart ways of getting help, like having a virtual assistant, for example, for a couple. You could start off with a couple of hours a week and work your way up as hopefully business improves and gets better. But that would be my first bit of advice. My second is for founders to know that your people are your power, and you have to hire people that are better than you at the job, because neurodivergent people tend to do this thing of thinking they can do everyone's job all the time and then they burn out. I think neurotypical founders do the same thing, but I find my fellow neurodivergent entrepreneurs, they do it more than others, and it's really not worth the headache. And then my third bit of advice would be remember to take annual leave. I know as entrepreneurs we don't have annual leave, but in 2020 to 2022 I did not take a single bit of holiday.
Wow.
Which is insane.
That's dangerous, isn't it? Yeah.
Very dangerous.
It's really not good. I mean, I also don't think that any of us operate at our peak if we don't take breaks. And I think that's the thing I've learned. I was terrible as well, to be honest with you, for a long time. But I've realized that I really have to force myself away. One, because I have a family and it's important to spend quality time away from work. But I also find I actually get great ideas when I'm a bit more relaxed. I'm not focusing all the time on the day-to-day stuff, and where I can go enjoy quality time with friends and family and explore new things and countries and all that good stuff, because I think that's needed. And you need to switch off, because you're no good to anyone if you burn out and, or just overworked. So I think that's really, really important that you shared that. Thank you very much. I guess there's been tons more content and education on neurodiversity in the last 5 years, which is amazing, but especially given it had always been a taboo topic. And I think that's definitely changing, which is great. What else needs to be done, and how have you found this has been a topic you've been probably talking about to a lot of people for a long time, but it feels like maybe the world is catching up a bit here. So how have you found that evolution, and what else do you think still needs to be done to ensure we have real meaningful change around this topic?
I think the first thing that needs to be done is an intersectional approach to our discussions about neurodiversity. The conversation is very Western, very Eurocentric, very white, and very male. The reason why I wrote my book is because when I was diagnosed with dyslexia, they showed me three pictures: Jamie Oliver, Albert Einstein, Richard Branson, and said, "You're just like these guys." And I remember looking at the teacher thinking, sorry, what? I have no correlation to these guys. I mean, maybe me and Richard could be friends now as entrepreneurs. Who knows? Might listen to this podcast. Hit me up, Richard. But aside from that, at 12 years old, like I didn't have any relationship with these people. They were a world away from me. And the conversations that we are still having about neurodiversity are still centered around people of these backgrounds. And it's also very classist, particularly in the UK. Conversations about neurodiversity are being had by the middle class because they've had the access to the information to know what neurodiversity is. So we need to start really breaking things down in that intersectional approach. I think we also need to look at neurodiversity and mental health as an intersection. A lot of neurodivergent individuals are living with chronic mental illnesses. 26% of autistic adults in the UK are diagnosed with clinical depression. That is scary. That's a considerate proportion of people. And that's just one of many statistics that I could say to you today. So that's what I would like to see in terms of the conversation. I would like to see a far more intersectional approach. I'd like to see more voices. I am still one of the few voices of color. I am still one of the youngest voices, and I am still one of the few female voices. That is quite scary given the world that we live in today. So that's something else that I would like to see. I'd like to see other individuals being platformed because multiple voices, multiple lived experiences allow us to come up with multiple inclusive solutions. I mean, I could go on for hours, but I can't because it's called 40-minute mentor.
No, that's amazing. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. I guess before we get to our wrap-up questions, I'd love to talk a bit about hiring because it's obviously very pertinent to the work we do as headhunters in the tech industry. What would you say are the biggest mistakes you see companies make when it comes to attracting, hiring, and retaining neurodivergent talent? And on the flip side to that, I'd love just any advice you have for founders that are thinking about how they can kind of solve for those problems and mistakes they've been making before and make that process more inclusive.
Yeah. So, in terms of hiring, the biggest mistake I see is in job descriptions. They're so unclear. Not only are they unclear, many of them are designed in a way, why are you typing your job description in Times New Roman font size 11, no line spacing? You could easily pick a dyslexia friendly font. You could easily make it bigger. Digital space is free. It's not like you're printing it out. And you could easily put in some line spacing that means that a dyslexic individual is able to read the advert that you are putting out for this job. So that would be my first thing is providing clear, accessible information about the role, and also thinking about advertising in different ways. I'd love to see video ads. I'd love to see audio ads, more accessible ways of hiring individuals. In terms of retention, flexibility, and this goes for the big organizations and the small ones. My big organizations are far too rigid, which really puts neurodivergent people off. You said hybrid working. I said I'll come in on Tuesday and Thursday. Why are you telling me I'm not within the bounds of my contract and you're telling me I have to come in on Monday and Wednesday? What difference does it make? Flexibility is crucial. But then for my smaller organizations, too flexible. It's like a playground. There's no rules. And if you are autistic, for example, those rules are quite important because you end up not really knowing how to navigate that workplace or that environment because you've kind of been left to your own devices and you're not naturally inclined to do the socially acceptable thing. And then lastly, I would say for all organizations, in terms of hiring and retention and really growing as an organization, fostering a supportive environment, fostering a supportive neuro inclusive culture, but also focusing on peer support. I want to work with organizations that are willing to build networks for neurodivergent individuals or are willing to collab with networks. I have clients who are now doing like neurodiversity and women's networks events. And in those events, we focus on what it's like to be a neurodivergent woman. So it's really tailored and it's really making that the most of that near to peer or peer to peer support. And that doesn't cost you anything.
Great advice. Thank you so much. I guess we touched upon this a little bit before when you mentioned about hot desking, but there's been obviously a push to get more talent back into the offices post COVID, and we're certainly seeing that with a lot of our clients. How does this impact neurodivergent talent?
It can be a good and a bad thing. It's all about the approach the organization takes. Being able to go into the environment, the workplace, can help neurodivergent individuals feel less lonely, especially if you've got that near to peer support set up where they can meet with other individuals in the organization that are neurodivergent too. It makes you feel less isolated and it creates a real sense of community, which is important for any business to thrive. Where the problem comes is when coming back is that lack of flexibility. Is when you say you must come in 4 days a week. I'll be completely honest, I'm my own boss, but I don't go into central London more than twice at a push 3 times a week. The journey itself is exhausting for me. I absorb a lot more information than your average person. So by the time I get to the office, I often have to, my first thing to do, might sound a bit lazy, is to have a coffee. I need about 30 minutes to decompress because I just need to like let go of everything that I've seen, I've smelt, I've heard, I've thought about to be able to get into the work. So I'm all for gently encouraging, compassionately encouraging people to come back into the office. But when you're not going to be flexible and when you're going to be rigid, it's just going to backfire, if I'm being honest. They'll just leave.
Yeah, fair enough. No, it's really, really important sort of messages there for, I think, for founders and leaders that are thinking through kind of the future of work and how to set up and just making sure they're thinking about these things when it comes to neurodivergent talent, which makes up a big proportion of the workforce. I think there's a lot of great people there that you do not want to lose. And there's brilliant advice in there, Onyinye. So thank you very much. I guess looking ahead, I know you're working on some very exciting new offerings in your consulting work, embracing the power of AI. So, do you mind telling us a bit more about that and how it's going to help make education and training, particularly on neurodiversity, more accessible?
Yeah, so I'm working with a brilliant organization called Quench.ai, and we have now come up with an initiative that enables clients who want to work with me to have a permanent Onyinye AI powered twin. And the reason why I've gone down this route is because I'm trying to show the workplace that AI is there to enhance, not to take away. So I'm still delivering my learning and development content. I'm still putting my content into this machine, but it allows the viewer to watch this content at their own pace and to ask me questions beyond the time of just having me in the office and then leaving. I'm dyslexic. I need extra time because I need more time to process information. If I was on the other end listening to my content and I've come in, I've done a lunch and learn, it's been brilliant, I've taken notes, and then I've left, the me that is watching would say, I wish I could ask her that question because it's finally landed. Like I finally have it in my brain, but I've gone. And then it's okay, I'll send her a quick DM on LinkedIn. I get hundreds of those. The likelihood of me seeing it is slim. So then that question doesn't get answered. So I'm really looking forward to bringing this to organizations. It also allows me to make it more affordable because I can deliver content at scale. So really exciting times ahead, and I'm looking forward to working with organizations who want to take up this offering.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. And what else have you got in the pipeline in 2024 that our listeners can kind of keep an eye out for?
Yes, I've got one very big thing. I recently just finished filming for BBC Two. I have been filming my very first documentary. I've been an expert contributor. I can't believe they refer to me as an expert, but anyway, just doing my best, guys. I have contributed significantly to I can't say the name, but a very big documentary that should be coming out in the autumn of 2024, and I can tell you what it's about. It's about neurodiversity and looking specifically at neurodiversity in Black and ethnic minority communities, looking at how neurodiversity is understood, educating these communities. I talk a lot in the documentary about the intersection between neurodiversity and religion, because a lot of people from ethnic minority communities that are neurodivergent will have had, don't worry, we'll take you to the imam, or we'll take you to the reverend who will say a prayer, and then your neurodiversity will miraculously just go away. And then they find that that's not the case. So really talking about how religious spaces play a crucial role in providing the right education and support for people who are neurodiverse. So really excited for that to come out later this year.
Amazing. Oh, that is super exciting. I can't wait to see it. So thank you for letting us in on that big secret. That's incredible. Well, we're at sadly at our wrap up questions. This is 40-minute mentor. So if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Gosh, this is a difficult one. And you might think this is an odd response, but I'd love to be mentored by Beyonce. And the reason being is because we kind of have similar roles. Hear me out. I can't sing, so don't ask me to do that. But what I'm saying is, she has her fingers in so many pies. She is so dedicated. She is so diligent. When she's on tour, she trains like an athlete, literally. When she produces anything, she produces it to the best of her ability. She has to learn to manage loads of different teams. And like myself, she's not signed to an agent. So I do a bit of TV work and content creation. I don't have an agent. I don't have a talent agency. And so I've had to learn to grow my own office, my own policies, my own procedures. And it would be amazing to be a fly on the wall in her office just to see what systems and processes she has put in place and see if there's anything I can learn and replicate and improve on. So
That's an awesome answer. And, my household, we have a number of big Beyonce fans, so they would probably agree with that. And final question, Onyinye, what is the last piece of advice, whether it's career or life advice, that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
failure is feedback. I wouldn't be on this podcast today if I didn't learn to embrace all the failures. And I've had some really big, scary failures, some legal failures along the way that I did not know about. I had no idea about due diligence. I learned the hard way that, before you consider going for an investor, you need to check everything about the investor, for example. And I think that's what's put me off going down the investor route, and why I've been an entrepreneur that's always bootstrapped. But that failure taught me so much. And it's why I'm able to give the advice I'm giving listeners today. So failure is feedback, and determination is the only thing that failure cannot cope with. So as long as you are determined, consistently determined, you will get there in the end.
That's a wonderful place to end it. And Onyinye, thank you so much for coming on 40-Minute Mentor and sharing your story and fantastic mentorship with us all.
Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much. And best of luck with everything, all the exciting plans you have this year and beyond.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.